Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next The Dragon Prince video. This one's going to be my review for The Dragon Prince Through the Moon. This is the first graphic novel for The Dragon Prince, and of course it's like canon. Specifically, this story is set after the events of Book 3. So this is actually the continuing as far into the franchise as we've ever got. We know now we're going to be getting book 4, 5, 6, 7, their whole plan. They're confirmed for it on Netflix, finally. But we don't have any details right now about when book 4 is actually going to come. So that's why this was actually so important in terms of like it coming out now. Or I suppose I actually got this early, it shipped out quite early actually. Because I think the release date is October 6th, so a good few weeks early. But this is meant to be our sort of gap book in between book 3 and 4. And straight away, I think your question is probably going to be tie-in comic. Those can be very hit and miss depending on the approach that they take. So how is the Dragon Prince's attempt at a tie-in comic compared to, say, let's say Voltron and Avatar comics? Avatar comics are typically excellent because, especially the mainline series, do continue the story. They do proper character development, proper plot covering areas of the universe we didn't know about before, extra world building stuff. Really, really well done tie-in comics. Voltron, on the other hand, was an example of just, comics for the sake of putting out comics. Not much going on in the stories, just very much, kind of villain of the week type things just to have more content with the characters, not really delving into too much character or anything like this. The Dragon Prince, you'll be happy to know, is much more like the Avatar comic. This actually feels like a very important comic. And a lot of times when I do my reviews for, say, the Avatar comics, one of the big criteria I use about pretty much whether I like it or not is there important content? Does this comic feel notable? Is there a reason for this comic to have been made? Most of the case it's yes for Avatar, and in this case, Through the Moon, absolutely yes. This feels very important. This feels must read for the Dragon Prince fans. In part because it has been quite a while now since book 3 aired, and I think everyone is getting really, they really want more content, and so the release of this is perfect. And it does do interesting and important stuff. So let's get into it here. I'll start off with a quick sort of a non-spoiler section, and then I'll get into spoilers towards the second half of the video. There'll be a timestamp in the video when I get to talking about spoilers, so obviously if you don't want spoilers, just, stop watching at that point. That's why I'm covering all the non-spoiler stuff first. So yeah, here Through the Moon, here's the cover. So our creative team is written by Peter Wortman, who's actually the artist currently on the Avatar comics. And the artist for Through the Moon is Xantha Bauma, or Buma, I'm not sure about the pronunciation. But yeah, here's a look at the cover. Really nice cover with Callum and Rayla on it, Through the Moon. That is one of that's Fifi's feather there that will help her sort of return to life, and they also show that on the back as well. Interesting thing is that you can obviously turn this upside down to see it from Rayla's perspective, and it really fits actually with what the comic ultimately deals with. That they sort of establish that the Moon Phoenix feather is sort of this feather that sort of exists almost between life and death, because the new life of the Moon Phoenix comes from the feather, and the feather is obviously left after the death of the previous iteration of its life. So it's this object that's between the real world and sort of the realm of death, or whatever way you want to call it. And so that's what we sort of deal with here, of Callum in the real world, and then Rayla through the Moon Nexus and so on, going into that realm of between life and death. And it definitely fits what's going on here, because the core plot of this is basically Rayla is having nightmares about, the people she cares about being taken away from her, like it's happened in the past, with her parents, with Runan. And now she's sort of fearing that Viren coming back could take Callum away from her. And obviously that's a new relationship. It's just recently started. The two of them love each other. What would happen to her if Callum was taken from her as well? And so the book is her dealing with just can she know for sure? Is there any way for her to figure out for sure that Viren is either gone for good or to confirm that he is going to come back? And that's what we sort of have to deal with here, as well as just, in general, sort of Rayla's feelings behind what she does and doesn't know about so many things in her life. Not knowing if her parents are alive or dead. Not knowing if Viren is still out there or not. Those are the questions that we deal with. So it does explore some actually really, really interesting topics. And of course, like you can see here, it deals heavily with the Moon Nexus. So we get to meet Lu Jane again, plus some of the other minor characters come in. And it's not just Callum and Rayla. Like Ez is in the book for at least a little bit. He's not a focus in this story, but he's there. Soren is in it. There's quite an important scene with him in the middle of the book. And a lot of the characters you expect to be there. I think it doesn't overdo it with trying to make the story super grand in scale. It definitely focuses on what it needs to, and I think it works. Like, it's about 125 pages overall, so it's quite a lengthy comic. That's like the equivalent of like 6 issues of a sort of standard 20-page comic. It's nearly 2 parts of an Avatar comic, which are usually like 70 or so pages. So they definitely have the time to tell a decent story here, and they use it quite well to set up the dynamics. And I think that the main reason I would say, like, in terms of a recommendation, why you do need to pick up this book is that it ends on a cliffhanger that, to me, is what they're going to use as a big setup going into book 4. And it's going to be so interesting to see when more people read this book, how they feel about doing the ending here. And then once book 4 comes out, what approach they're going to take in terms of introducing that plot element, which is ultimately going to come from here. Like, are they going to animate like some stuff from this and show it in flashback, or what? Again, this is where, like, us not knowing the exact details of book 4 yet is interesting, in that I think most fans suspect they're going to do some sort of a time skip, and I think the ending here would lean in that direction, at least to a certain degree. Maybe not a lengthy time skip, but a certain one of like at least a couple of months or so. And that's going to be very interesting, especially because whenever they like release a trailer for book 4, I think it'll be very telling what the response is to people who have read the comic versus people who haven't, and how much information each group has. So I suppose some final points here before I get into the spoilers are just that fans of Callum and Rayla's relationship, I think, are really going to like this book. I really like their relationship and how it came together, and I think it's really well done here. You get the sort of nice cutesy romantic moments that you just really want to see as a fan of the ship, but there's obviously a little bit of tension between the two, just over, Rayla not being able to sort of move on and is so focused on finding out about, these things she doesn't know about, whereas Callum is more like he has moved on from some of the stuff that's happened to him, and that brings them into conflict a little bit, but it's not so dramatic that it's going to like tear them apart for good. It's just an example of just a nice little bit of tension adding to the development of the relationship, and that they make up, and he tries to help her out, and that's where the plot of the book comes from. And then especially the ending of this book, which I don't want to spoil, that is going to really create a great dynamic going into the next book. So pretty high praise from me. I don't want to like overblow it out of proportion in that it's not like 10 out of 10. I think this book is a kind of solid, like, I'd say like 8.5. I think it was actually a really good start to Dragon Prince content, and I think for me, who I can be fairly critical about tie-in comics like this not delivering on anything important, to me this one actually for the most part did deliver. The art, I think, is actually pretty well done. It feels accurate to the show while still being its own thing and emphasizing what you need from a comic, which is good expressions on characters' faces to really get the emotions across and so on. And you definitely can see that here. They don't like linger over like it has to be super, super detailed and accurate to the show forever, but it's definitely still recognizable as the show, while, you know, doing its own thing. And I think that's an example of a good art style. Again, if they continue to do more comics like this, I would be interested to see, you know, them maybe try out some different artists until they maybe settle on one. But, you know, Xantha Abuma here did a really, really good job, especially across like over 100 pages of content. So yeah, high recommendation in the non-spoiler side of things, but let's get into the details for everyone who wants to know. I'm just being a little bit more cautious about spoilers in this video just because it is sort of before the book is officially available to everyone. But anyway, like I said, the core of the plot starting off is Rayla having a nightmare about like something happening to Callum that would take him away from her in the same way that's happened to her parents and Runan. And they sort of show it in sort of this way, as you can see here, sort of encased in ice like Runan, encased in ice her parents, and then what if Viren did that to Callum and he was taken away? How would she actually deal with that? And so it's bringing up this idea of she cares for Callum and doesn't want to lose him. She's attached to him. And what will she do to make that happen? And that's sort of the dynamic across the whole book. And what's very interesting, like I explained earlier on, the Fifi feather, this connects basically life and death with the way the Moon Phoenix works. But she's obviously being tickled with this as she wakes up, and this sort of informs like the end of her nightmare, that some of it might have been real, and that's why she actually has proper like worries about what if he has returned. And you know, they blend, I think, quite nicely the whole idea of like, okay, they get a letter from Lujayne, they have to go to the Moon Nexus, and they'll perform the ritual to basically lead to the rebirth of Fifi through the feather. So that's where most of the book is set, at the Moon Nexus, which is where we were in book 1, and we're going back there now. So that makes sense completely. So Ez is going to come with them as well. But yeah, the core dynamic is then sort of presented of kind of Callum wishing they could all move on, and everyone sort of giving across the impression to Rayla like they have moved on from the threat of Viren and so on. They're going on this like vacation, this fun trip to meet Lujayne again at the Moon Nexus, and Rayla is still on edge. She doesn't think it's over, and that's what she's really dealing with. You know, you can see at the top of this page, she's very frustrated about the fact that, you know, no one else except her seems to think anything more is going on. But she sort of does acknowledge that maybe it is her just being a bit of a mess right now, and so, you know, there's some cute stuff here as they sort of like, you know, help each other through these sort of situations, and she hopes she can sort of cheer up on this vacation. But of course, where they go to ends up being a little bit gloomier than expected, because of course this is the cursed caldera all the way up to the Moon Nexus. But we can see that, like, you know, Soren is with them and so on. We have the spider illusion, but this time it's physical. You can't just touch and go through it. What's going on here? So the first, I suppose, big reveal of the book is basically that Lujayne is in a relationship with Alan, and Alan is the swordsman who the guy who had the Sunforge knife or sword went up against in that episode back in book 1, and he like chopped his sword in half. It's actually revealed here that they're sort of like together here performing this illusion, that Alan has made basically a wooden structure that Lujayne creates an illusion around, so the illusions actually have some solidity to them. And then really quickly they figure out that, wait, you two are a thing, like an item, a couple. And you really notice this because Alan calls her Janie Lou, so he has a nickname for her, and she sort of as you can see here, sort of winks at Callum saying you two are a thing. So that's really interesting, and I think in one of the commentaries that they did or something like that, they also teased that this was also a thing. So very, very fitting. Lujayne, of course, really wants Fifi back as well, and they're going to prepare for the ceremony to bring her back. But before that, we of course get like some fun stuff of just Lujayne noticing that Callum and Rayla are a couple. So some really just nice stuff is like they have to explain like how their relationship started, and then they ask her about how she and Alan met. But she's just noting that, like, oh wow, things are changing, and we saw that in book 3, that like Amaya, and so on. Even some of the random soldiers seem to almost be like pairing off with some of the other elves as well. So it's definitely coming back together, and it's this interesting blending of the cultures once again, and how much things are changing, and how relationships like this actually like help to bridge those gaps. So just very fun scenes. She just says, it was right after I sent Ezran over on Fifi. Actually, I was disguised as a human, just planning to mess with a few towns on my way back. But I met Alan, and one thing led to another. Those things being, in order, a date, someone noticing I had 4 fingers, and then a lot of pitchforks. And Rayla, of course, comes in as just like, should have worn gloves. That's a key thing there for acting like a human. And yeah, this is then when Rayla gets back into the whole idea of, like, you know, everyone wants to believe that Viren's dead and that the whole threat is over, but she still has her doubts. Callum sort of interrupts her a little bit here and is like, oh, Lujane, you thought I couldn't do this, but I actually have the Sky Arcanum now, and he proves it to her. So it's this, like, kind of big reveal for Lujane, who kind of had that opinion of humans that they could never learn to just have magic themselves. And so Callum proving her wrong here by having the Sky Arcanum is a really interesting thing. But as at this point we get into, I think one of the nicer parts of the book, again, Fifi, her sacrifice to help Ezran in book 3 was really emotional moment. It's Ez sort of assisting Lujane with the ritual to bring Fifi back. So they just kind of float the feather out onto the lake, and they sort of hold hands together. And Lujane talks about the cycle of the moon. It's the sort of philosophy, in a way, of anyone related to the kind of moon magic. It's the moon embodies the cycle. Bit by bit, it will fade away. Then bit by bit, it will brighten. They hold hands. And they just know that this is the same for the Moon Phoenix, which represents this perfectly as well. It dies, but leaves behind sort of its life essence, in a way, in the feather, as it's dead. But then from that feather, from the death, then comes the life once again, as the Phoenix can then be reborn from that feather. And that's the cycle of, like, always waxing and waning, basically. So very interesting stuff, but it's all for, I suppose, Rayla. It still feels like this is all sort of this illusion, and as much as it's this emotional moment, seeing Fifi kind of come back, and some really nice art here to show as the feather, as they do the ritual, transforms into an egg. Really like the joke here, actually. Callum says, please tell me we don't have to go on a big quest to hatch this one. And Lujane, it's a really, the expression is really good in this panel. Just gives Callum this, like, look, like, did you really just say this at that moment? But it was a clever line from Callum. So the egg does immediately hatch, and we get baby Fifi here in Ezran's hand. So really cute reveal here, as, you know, Fifi's back, but she's a baby once again. So the rebirth of the moon cycle, I suppose, here. But everyone's happy except Rayla, who sort of runs off. And we find out that as much as everyone seemed to like what Lujane said about the cycle of the moon, it didn't hit her as hard, because she just talks about, you know, the cycle, it's a cycle, not an ending. What does that even mean? Life from death? My parents aren't going to come back inside some silver egg. I don't want a metaphor. I want to see them again. That these words to her are just an illusion, and that it's fake. That it doesn't mean anything, when, sure, for a moon phoenix, it fits perfectly. But for actual people, they die and they're not going to come back. And she's just having so many conflicted thoughts about, you know, no one's really believing her about thinking Viren might be back, and now she's really thinking at this stage, like, given that she learned a bit more about her parents at the end of the last book, that she, if they are out there, she really does want to see them, but she also has to think that potentially they actually could be dead, and so she doesn't want to get her hopes up. And it's just, she sort of snaps at Callum and is like, you wanted me to move on from this, you wanted me to forget, to forgive up, but Callum, this is their argument in the book. He says, yeah, you're not the only one who's lost people, Rayla, but the key point here, but you know what happened to them. I don't have answers. And Callum gets annoyed at this and says, yes, I know what happened to them. One of the people you're so worried about killed my stepfather. So it's just this idea almost that knowing can almost be worse than not knowing. That because Callum knows, he now has this very conflicting piece of information that, like, Rayla's, like, one of her father figures killed his father figure. Yet he knows how much Runan means to Rayla, and he cares about Rayla. And it's just like, because he knows he has that, whereas at least there's some hope, I suppose, for Rayla, thinking that her parents could be alive, but it hurts her to not know either way. And it's a very realistic sort of dynamic here. And, Rayla sort of storms off saying, keep believing in illusions if it makes you feel better. So she doesn't like these, in her mind, just words that are nothing but words. They try to have meaning behind them, but they don't really mean anything. But she still cares, because immediately after this, she has another nightmare. And this time about Callum being in the ice and it being shattered and him being gone. So, she still cares. It's not a breakup here. It's just a little argument that they had. And that's where we go from here, basically. Callum goes to see Lujain, but this time for kind of romance advice. And she just says little fights are just a part of any relationship. And this is where they come to the idea of, like, she is like, oh, I'm impressed that you mastered an arcanum. You're really proving humans can be very different. She gives him some moon opals so he can use some moon magic. And then they sort of eventually settle on the idea of, like, oh, maybe there is some sort of a way to figure out. There's some sort of way to activate the portal once again. You said it was a portal between life and death. We could figure out a lot of stuff if we did that. We could find out if Viren is alive. We could find out about Rayla's parents. Because the key point here that they don't linger on too much towards the end, but it's actually an important point. You'd be pulled to the souls of the dead you share a connection to, whether that connection was made of love or of hate. And so Lujain just warns Callum that, like, I don't recommend doing this because, one, it's dangerous, and that portal basically was destroyed for a reason, so don't try to recreate it. But of course he's going to, because he wants to help Rayla, who's really struggling with what's going on. So you can see that there's depth to what's going on here. Like this scene with Callum and Lujain, like it goes on for like a good few pages, but there is depth to it, and I do like that. So there's a sense of, like, they'd have to rebuild the Moonhenge before they do this, and that's where Alan is actually going to come in, because he's a carpenter. He can make stuff. But we see Soren and Alan having a sword fight here. Rayla comes in to get involved in this, but actually Soren trips her up over here, so he gets the advantage over her. She's a little bit off, you can sort of tell, because of what she's dealing with and exploring on herself. But she's come here because she wants to talk to Soren about something. So as Callum goes on to do the technique he used towards the end of book 3, the Historia Viventum, to sort of see what happened in the past, he basically discovers here the ritual to activate the portal. So she didn't know he could do this, but it's a fun thing of, like, this is how he figures it all out. And then because he has that sort of ability to just sort of look at something and remember it, he's going to know exactly what to do. But this is a really nice scene in the book, Rayla and Soren. She basically comes to ask him, okay, you were there in the castle when the attack came in, right at the start of the series. What happened to the assassins? She just wants to know, flat out, what happened. And he confirms that, like, all of them except one, the leader, and they go on to confirm that it's Runan, all of the others were killed. So she finds out at that point that Runan is alive, up until the point where Viren does secret stuff that Soren isn't entirely involved with or knows about. But his opinion on his father is such that, like, Viren took him. I doubt he lived very long. And she's like, you don't know? And he just notes that, like, I thought I killed my father at the Battle of the Stormspire. When I saw that I hadn't, that it was only an illusion, I was relieved. But maybe it would have been better if I really did kill him. It bothers you that we never found Viren's body. He's always been good at fooling people. Maybe he did it again. The worst thing is not being sure. So Soren can definitely see eye to eye with Rayla over just this idea of not knowing is almost worse than knowing, because they have that similar thing of he's lost in thought about what could have potentially been with regards to the decisions he's made recently, and I suppose how he feels about his father going forward. So even though it's just a small scene, it's probably Soren's like only notable scene in the whole book. That's an interesting one. Like it doesn't tell us too much else about his dynamic with his father or anything like that, but that's what he's thinking about post book 3. That's what he's going to be thinking about going into book 4. And it's stuff like that that you want a comic like this set in between the two to actually do. So this is where we get the sort of reunion in a way between Callum and Rayla. They get to talking again, revealing that their fight wasn't that big of an issue. So he reveals that he was working on some sort of a plan. They're going to repair the Moonhenge and activate the portal. That'd be the way to do things. He warns her about all the potential dangers of this, that it is dangerous. You could be lost forever. Your mind could be shattered. But she's just like, I'm not afraid. But he does also say, you'd also need to swim in water. And she's like, but she agrees to it. No, she has to do this. She says, listen, Callum, Soren was worried about Viren too, worried that we never found his body. We need to know what happened to Viren. He's a threat to the whole world. This might be the only way to be sure he's actually gone. And she's like, oh, you can do moon magic now? But no, it's only because he has these moon portals. So this is when they then have this, right towards the middle of the book, this talk about, Rayla says, I want to go in alone. Don't come through the portal with me. And Callum initially argues, but then is kind of like, okay, I get you need to do this, but if something does go wrong, I am going to jump in after you. But he's going to let her go in on her own at first. She initially disagrees with this, but ultimately, you know, they come together. Really nice moment here. Not quite a kiss yet, but you know, pretty good stuff. Just showing that they're really, really close. And then, yeah, they go to Alan. They're going to use him and his skills to rebuild the Moonhenge, and they treat it as like, oh, keep it secret from Lujane because she doesn't want this involved. And we just basically go through the idea that there's, I think, a couple of days until the full moon when they can actually activate this, and we just go through the various stages of, you know, Ezran playing around with the newly reborn Fifi, them continuing to build this thing, and then once it actually happens, Callum activates the spell. Everything sort of gets destroyed, but it does activate the portal. So it's this one-time opportunity to go through, and Rayla does actually jump into the water to go through. And so this is the point in the book where we basically go from like the top of this cover to it being the other world, basically here, the realm of life and death. And they note that here with, you know, she dives down into the water, but then ends up coming out from like the ceiling of this world, basically. So and then everything is like different. Like the water is black. Yeah, the sun is just this sort of like black void in the sky. And she's looking around. She's like, okay, Viren, parents, Runan, mom, dad, are you here? Anyone? But the people who arrive before her are the assassins, the other assassins that she was a part of, that group, who, you know, they have that whole betrayal mentality with her. And it's really sort of creepy here. They're like these, you know, these shadow forms, basically. And on the bottom of this page, and again, you go back to what Lujane said, that when you go through, the people you are going to like attract to yourself in this world are the people who had a strong connection to you, either through love or through hate. And in this case, the other assassins that were killed are attracted to Rayla through hate. They hate her and they sort of blame her for what happened here. And this is very interesting in terms of, I suppose, this sort of traumatic experience that Rayla goes through that will inform her decision at the end of the book. But yeah, on the outside, Rayla's floating in the water, and they're just kind of wondering, like, if we take her out before she comes out on her own, she'll be trapped on the other side and she'll just be a husk. So you either have to go in there after her or wait for her to come out. That's the way it is. And yeah, we see that continuing this sort of fight, runaway kind of scene that they have with Rayla and the other assassins. They call her a traitor. What good is an assassin who's afraid to kill? They say, you let a human live, but you killed us all. Our mission was a failure. And she just tries to, like, explain herself. You don't understand, we didn't. And as they're about to take her out, they notice that, wait, look at her wrist. The binding is gone. Then you completed our task. You didn't doom us after all, at last. And then they disappear. Because they're happy with that. That's all they wanted. They wanted just to know that the mission was not this kind of complete failure. They don't care about the specifics of what happened, but just seeing that her binding is gone, her assassin's contract binding thing is gone, and they just go away, as she's left to just say this to no one. I didn't kill anyone. The Dragon Prince was alive. We didn't. None of this needed to happen. No one had to die. And she just screams, Viren, where are you? Like, she's sort of blaming him for everything. And that's a pretty dark scene of just knowing that they seem to commit in this scene to the idea that as the other assassins were dying, they did sort of blame Rayla for what happened and had a level of hatred towards her. And that simply them thinking she has actually gone ahead and killed someone is enough to, fix things for them. But here's probably one of the bigger points in the book, is that after she calls it to Viren, she kind of continues to explore. She finds the cocoon. And obviously this was the tease at the end of book 4, was like, Claudia has revived Viren. Viren is still alive. But Aravos has now created this cocoon and is merging or metamorphizing or whatever into something. And they just reveal it right here. That what's inside the cocoon? It's Viren. And because of the scene that we saw from the end of book 3, it confirms to us that, I suppose, Aravos is merging into sort of this clone, his own body, but it's like a copy of Viren. And as we see the more people who sort of hate Rayla coming out to grab her, in this case it seems like it's Katalis soldiers who, I guess, have a hatred towards elves because they died during the elf attack on the castle at the start of the series. So that's why they would be drawn towards her here. But we, of course, see confirming it is Viren in the cocoon. And then he sort of opens his eyes, but the eyes are black. And, of course, he has all these scars all over him. So she's coming here to sort of find out if Viren is alive. And from her perspective, she takes from this that Viren is in fact alive, or at least he's in some sort of a state between life and death, where he is going to return at some point. But she doesn't know that it's actually Aravos and not actual Viren. So I suppose this sort of sets up this idea that going into book 4, we're going to have this sort of two Viren situation where Aravos will basically be within Viren's body, but then there'll also be the actual Viren, who I'm guessing the approach they're going to have to take is potentially Viren maybe attempting to redeem himself, but it not working out so well because Aravos is going to be acting with the exact same body, effectively looking so much like him, to ruin everything he tries to do. We'll see exactly how it goes, but it creates this two Viren situation we didn't know about before. And I suppose it fits that in a way Aravos has had this plan, that because he sort of implanted himself in Viren and took him over, he's now sort of gained a familiarity with Viren's body and can now, through the cocoon, transform himself into that exact body, even if Viren himself is actually still alive. So yeah, just as it seems like Rayla's about to be taken away, this is when Callum dives in after her, And they reveal here that the only way he's able to dive in after her is by holding onto a moon feather phoenix, because a moon phoenix feather is tied to, between life and death. So once he holds onto that, he can sort of maintain some level of control in the other world. So we see sort of Callum, dive in after her. We see again the soldiers kind of coming after them to try and stop them, but they do manage to eventually get out together, and they sort of swim up through the surface. There's a bit of an action scene here as like Callum gets to use his magic. Rayla sort of defends against these sort of soldier spirits, but eventually, they swim up to the surface and come back through into the world. And it seems like, oh, only a few pages left. The book is going to resolve in a very nice way. Rayla had this situation where she was dealing with all this stuff. There's a little rift with Callum, but together they got out of this. They've sort of confirmed that Viren is going to come back, but there's no real answer about Runan or her parents, and that's just the way it's going to be. But no, they surprise you with the exact approach. Obviously, when they get out, we get our Rayla and Callum kiss, which has been wanted, of course, in the book. And the final conversation, I think, is really nice. They're just talking on a stone nearby. She says, "I don't know. I didn't find my parents. I didn't see Runan. I still have no answers, but they're gone, Callum. I'm never going to be okay with that, but I guess I have to face it." And he just says, "I'm always here for you, right?" As they hug. "Maybe we should have a real vacation with fewer ghosts. We can go back to Zadia, spend some time exploring together." And she does say at this point, this is when she reveals, "I didn't find my parents or Runan, but I did find Viren. He was in some weird magic cocoon. It wasn't like anything else I saw there. It looked wrong." And she says, "Right before you found me, he opened his eyes and I knew. He may be caught between life and death somehow, but Viren is on this side of things. He's alive, Callum." And he just says, "I don't know, Rayla. I didn't understand half of what I saw in there." But she just says, "He's alive and I need to make sure he never hurts anyone ever again." And so he says, "I trust you and you're right. We should go as soon as we can. If he's in the real world, we'll find him." And she says, "No, I'm going alone. Viren has taken away everyone I love. Everyone except you. I can't risk you coming with me." And he says, "No, you're not doing this without me. I let you jump into the Nexus alone, and I knew right away I made the biggest mistake of my life. I could have lost you. We do this together. Don't try changing my mind." And I think the panel there is really interesting, as Callum is resolute when he says this. He means this. But Rayla is sort of distant upon hearing this. And she's then at the start of the next page, she just says, "Okay, Callum, we'll go ... together." And he's like, "Good, we'll leave first thing tomorrow together. That's the most important thing, together." And her answer doesn't involve the word together. "I never want to lose you either. I love you, Callum. I love you too." And we just end with a kind of flash to I suppose, during the middle of the night. She leaves a letter behind and the moon phoenix feather. And she is going to leave on her own. Leave Callum behind. And we get this thing that's kind of been iterated over the course of the book. Lujain gave this kind of words of wisdom, and they used it to sort of trick Lujain. "White lies are illusions you build with your words to protect the hearts of those you love. I'm sorry, you can't come with me." She kisses him on the forehead and puts her hood up and heads out on her own to sort of find Viren to make sure, but she's doing it on her own. And she's doing it on her own out of love from her point of view, is that she doesn't want to lose or put Callum at risk. So she's doing it all on her own, even though I suppose this is going to hurt Callum hearing this. And I thought that was such an interesting way to end the book, because to me the only way to interpret that is that means that realistically book 4 is going to have to start with Rayla separate from everyone else. That they're going to have to introduce things with like in between seasons, Rayla left to try and find Viren, even though we agreed to go together. And I suppose the dynamic that this is going to create is just Callum wanting to go after her, and feeling maybe a little bit betrayed by her actions, given that they talked about this, and he really meant it when he said they have to do this together. And how is he going to feel this whole time? I think we're going to see probably a slightly depressed Callum, I suppose, at the start of the book, until they meet again. And then Rayla, I suppose, at this point, like, we better understand, I suppose, why she's doing this on her own, but when is she finally going to realize that she needs to do it together? That everything they've accomplished in the series up to now has been because they work together as a team, but now she's going off on her own, and it's that whole attachment thing. It's sort of the Anakin Skywalker style dynamic. It's similar to sort of Aang's dynamic from Avatar as well, just the character who sort of struggles with attachment, especially when it comes to losing those close to them. And for Rayla, she just has so little confirmation about the people close to her that she thinks it's only Callum at this point left, and if she lost him, what would she be? When in reality, I suppose we as the audience know that Runan's soul is just trapped in a coin, and it's heavily implied that her parents' souls are also in the same situation, which is why she didn't see Runan or her mother or father in the other world. If they were dead, they would have been attracted to her based on their love for her, but they weren't there. And she sort of takes it as like, well, not knowing is basically the same as them being gone, when she doesn't actually know for sure. All she pretty much took away from going to the other world was negative things. That Viren is still out there, but she doesn't know the whole situation with Viren and Aravos, and that as far as she's concerned, the other assassins hated her. And she had to deal with that, of course, back in book 1, a little bit in the last book as well. So it is going to be very interesting to see what they do in terms of, like, are they going to pick up, like, immediately after this with just, like, a gap of a few days, and they have to basically fill us in just on this? Or is it going to be like, Rayla left, like, a few months ago, we haven't been able to track her down or find her, but I'm still searching? That's what I'm not sure about. I think it probably limits how big of a time skip they can do. I don't think they're going to do a massive, like, multi-year time skip or anything like that. But I'd say, like, 2-3 months maybe feels reasonable, where, like, Rayla would have had enough time to actually search the world for Viren and maybe not find anything. And it leaves enough time for Callum to actually, I suppose, develop, how he feels about the fact that they seemingly agreed on they do it together, but she went against that. And what is he going to be like going forward now? And so on. We also have, like, I suppose, a baby Fifi, who, do they confirm, like, if Ezran holds on to Fifi or not, or if he's just playing with her? It's kind of unclear, I think. I don't think they settle on anything, because the book doesn't end by, like, fully going back to what's happening with Ezran and Fifi, but yeah, I guess they might explore that at some point, maybe at the start of book 4. But yeah, I think it just highlights that there is stuff going on in this. I really like the character exploration of Rayla throughout this book. Similarly, like, Callum, actually, I thought got some decent development as well, with, just that one little outburst that kind of caused the argument of just, he struggles to deal with the idea that Runan is so important to Rayla, but Runan was the one who killed, like, his father, stepfather. That was nice to see, but then he's always trying to help Rayla, but in this case, Rayla is not letting him because she wants to protect him. But it's like she's going to protect him by, like, staying away from him and making him feel like he's been betrayed in some way. It's just like Rayla thinks this is good for the good of Callum, but it's not. And it's just what will finally hit home to her, that she's made a mistake here. That teamwork is the important thing. And I really like that. And just overall, like, the Lujane thing with her relationship with Alan, I like that as, like, a little bit of setup of just even more characters are, like, human and elf relationships. And I suppose as we go further and further into Zadia and see more of the different species of elves, and we see humans interact more with elves, we'll see the peace begin to come back, and we'll, I suppose, have to find out Aravos's backstory, what he's about, what he's trying to accomplish now, and especially what position this puts Viren in, now that we have some sense of what the whole cocoon thing is about, that we're going to have two Virens, I guess. And I suppose it depends on what exactly they do. Like, did Claudia and Viren leave, or are they staying there next to the cocoon? Like, are we going to see a scene of the cocoon hatching and Viren talking to Viren? Because that's probably going to create a situation where Viren is going to quickly realize he's been used this whole time, and that they're going to have to get away from the newly reborn with a full-on body of his own Aravos. And yeah, I suppose the backstory of him is probably the most interesting thing at this point, now that he's basically our main villain. And I guess we'll see what sort of a path they take Claudia and Viren down as well. Claudia seems to be going further and further down the sort of desperate attempts to use dark magic to fix anything that seems to be a problem. And it seems to all be out of care, but she's sort of almost like destroying herself in the process, in that what they imply she had to do to fix Viren, to bring him back to life, is probably a step too far. But we'll see where they go with these two characters. Can they redeem them or not, and so on. But either way, like, I do recommend this book. I don't want to like overdo my like recommendation here, and then have you read it and be like, oh, you said it was going to be amazing, but it was only okay. In my mind, this is on the better side of these tie-in comics, and I think there's some important stuff in this. And if they can continue this quality level with like future comics, sure, I'm all over that. Like, definitely, I'll get the next book and so on. But yeah, I suppose I'll just quickly end. The only other Dragon Prince book that's out that I don't have is the art book for the Dragon Prince. So let me know if you would like to see a review of that or not. I haven't bought that book yet, but if there's a want for a review of it, I will pick it up, I suppose. But yeah, that's been the in-depth review discussion for the Dragon Prince Through the Moon.